Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Tea Party is Dead podcast. I am your host, Jim, and today we have a very special guest with us. She is retired Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. She was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. She was working in the Pentagon on 9/11. She also opposed the Iraq War and was in the documentary Why We Fight. Now, I want to say that the reason why I mentioned that she was in the documentary Why We Fight was because I saw her say in an interview that many years ago that she only had a small piece in it. But I want you to know, everybody I talked to, that saw that documentary, the only thing they remember is Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for that very nice introduction.
How is cattle farming in Virginia?
It's great. It's good. There's a lot of talk about the economy, and one of the places that they say you can be sure to that it'll keep growing is agriculture. So we have a small cattle farm in western part of Virginia, and it's just fine. It's just fine.
Awesome. All right. Well, before I guess we get into the interviews, I just wanted to get your opinion or comments on the presidential debates. We happen to be in the middle of the presidential debate season, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Well, we've got these two people, these two candidates. You've got your Romney and you got your Obama, and I guess they had a debate. I listened to part of that debate. I watched and read the transcript later, watched parts of it. I didn't see the whole thing of the presidential debates. And I also listened to the vice presidential debates. And, these guys, both Ryan and Romney, Obama and Biden, they're arguing over very fine differences about how to be statists. So they promises to the people. All of them are way, way over on the statist side. Neither of them are fighting for the Constitution. Neither of them seem to want to talk about the Department of Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, or anything like that. So, they're just not, and they're promising things which constitutionally presidents cannot promise.
Right.
They're promising either not to go to war or to go to war. Well, going to war is a congressional responsibility. That decision is to the U.S. Congress. They're talking about spending and new programs and putting forth legislation. But that's all a congressional function. And what we have in this country, of course, is a Congress that's very statist and hasn't done a very good job. But we've kind of warped our idea of what the president is about. And so we've got these two guys, and from what I can tell, and this is my conclusion on the debate so far, is neither of them really understand what's in the Constitution. And what they're for and what they're against are largely irrelevant to me. It is very much the same. I think for people that like Republicans and like Romney, maybe they'll be a little happier with Romney than they will Obama, and vice versa if Obama wins. But they're both doing the same thing. They're both offering the same thing, and they both misunderstand the Constitution in the same way.
I couldn't agree more. I don't think I could have said it any better. All right, so I just want to go back into the past a little bit. You said during an interview with C-SPAN many years ago that you switched to the Libertarian Party because you felt that the Republican Party had left you. Since you're once again a registered Republican, I was hoping if you could explain a little bit how the Republican Party left you and why you decided to go back to the Republican Party.
Yeah. Well, how they left me is I was raised by two parents who supported Barry Goldwater. Of course, that was during the Cold War, because Goldwater was somewhat of a pro-war guy in a sense, but it was in a different environment. So in any case, he was small government. He talked about the Constitution. He wanted to spend less. Of course, this was early 1960s, so they weren't spending near what they're spending now. And my parents supported that version of conservatism, and certainly I liked Ronald Reagan first term. The kind of things that he was saying, and many Republicans will say that they also liked that. But Reagan, his 8 years, and then subsequent to that, 4 years of Bush 41. These guys grew the deficit, grew spending, grew government, didn't keep a single promise that they had made to cut any part of the federal government. So at that point, yeah, I could see, well, the words, I kind of agree with the words of small, limited government, constitution, states' rights, these kinds of things. But the party itself wasn't doing it. And as I got older, I realized, hey, they're talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk. So the talk in my mind, I was a Republican, but the party itself was not adhering to what they said were their principles. What I found is I'm actually a libertarian. Now, I came back to the Republican Party, and in the state of Virginia, we don't have party registration. So technically, I'm not a registered Republican. I'm a Republican because I donated to the Republican Party of Virginia. Makes me a Republican. $5 annual donation, and that makes me a Republican in this state. Now, if we had party registration, I would I would register as a Republican. But the reason I did that was not because the Republican Party changed. It has not changed as far as I can tell. There is a small liberty movement within the Republican Party, so I identify with that movement. And my reason for coming back and calling myself a Republican was so I could run in a primary in the 6th District here against a 10-term establishment representative that we've had. He's a Republican. He's a very big state, very pro-Patriot Act. He supports spending if the Republican leadership tells him to. So he's really kind of a waste of space. And in order his time, he's no longer serving the interests of our district, at least the libertarian and the small limited government interests. So I needed to run against him in a primary. My is in registering or paying my dues to the Republican Party is really to participate in the liberty wing of that Republican Party. And this would be, in Kentucky, this is the Rand Paul wing. I mean, this is in many ways, it's a Tea Party wing, although many people in the Tea Party are only a hair's breadth away from being an establishment Republican. So I don't really identify with the Tea Party 100%, but I do identify with the liberty wing of the Republican Party.
So you said that you're back to the Republican Party. I happened to read one of your articles that you posted on Lew Rockwell talking about the Republican convention that you attended. I was just wondering, were you tempted at any moment to once again leave the Republican Party after that?
Tempted? Oh, you know it. You know it. I mean, it was absolutely shocking. To see it and in person actually witness this kind of the arrogance and the alienation that conscious direct efforts to alienate and to abuse the liberty wing of the Republican Party and particularly to abuse and disrespect Ron Paul, who is a basically a lifelong Republican. He served I don't know how many total terms in the House as a Republican from Texas. Has brought huge interest into politics as a Republican. When years ago, Ron Paul, I think, and this was before I even knew about him, ran as a Libertarian presidential candidate. But all of the interest and the activity of, exciting the young people, bringing people into politics, he has done almost all of that as a Republican. And to see the Republican Party treat him, the leadership of the Republican Party, to treat him with the disrespect, to treat his fans and his supporters and his actual delegates with the arrogance and the abuse that they handed out at that convention, and of course leading up to it. But since I was at the convention, actually I witnessed some of this, and it was just awful. Yeah, I was certainly ashamed to be a Republican that day. There's no doubt about it. I was ashamed.
Yeah, and I think only time will tell in less than a month whether or not the chairman of the Republican Party, Reince Priebus, will be regretting exactly what happened during that convention. Okay, so you talked about your congressional campaign a little bit, and Virginia is a swing state. I was just curious, do you believe that the Tea Party in your area or the state does hold their elected leaders accountable?
Well, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. The Tea Parties, we have a lot of different. It's not one party here in the state of Virginia. There are regional groups, all kind of variously identifying themselves as part of a Tea Party. Some are part of a Tea Party federation. Some are independent. There's a lot of squabbling that goes on between the various ones. We had 4 different candidates running for the Senate seat that George Allen He's the one that won the primary, but there were three other people, and of those three, I think all three of them pulled Tea Party votes. And there are Tea Party members that we know personally who voted for Allen, who is more of an establishment Republican. So if you look at that, you know, the Tea Party was all over the board, which means I think they're not particularly organized in such a way that they are, you know, influencing politics in any serious way. They certainly didn't in the Senate race. Now, in our House race that we had, our primary, the Tea Party was pretty much against the incumbent. He is very much an establishment statist, but he also has kind of a weak personality, and he's not an attractive candidate. So, you know, there was some excitement about, hey, this guy's being challenged by a constitutional conservative. In fact, the guy I ran against, the incumbent, started calling himself, the last 2 weeks of the campaign, called himself a constitutional conservative. Now, that tells you that he perceived the Tea Party, the constitutional conservatives, were a force to be reckoned with, at least in that primary. But when you look at the Senate race, which was held at the exact same time, people were all over you know, some voted for this candidate, that candidate, the establishment one had votes, you know. So I don't really think that they're that powerful. And the other thing is, the Tea Party has, it's hard to say what it is. Certainly Ron Paul was a big part of that movement 4 years ago, you know, in 2008, in this evolution of a kind of liberty wing of the Republican Party. But a lot of the Tea Party membership is not libertarian in any way. In fact, a lot of them are very much, they call themselves constitutionalists, but they like to pick and choose which part, you know, which one of the first 10 amendments, you know, they really want to fight for.
Right.
So that you know, when you're not clear on what you stand for, it dilutes the strength of the organization. So I'm not sure. The other thing is, and this is only what I see around here, is that we do not have our Tea Parties, the ones up the northern part of the valley, and even, well, to a lesser extent down in Roanoke. But there's very few young people that will come to a Tea Party meeting. So what does that tell you?
Right.
You know, the young people are the ones inheriting this debt. They're the ones that, if there's a chance of influencing things through voting, which I'm, you know, it's debatable. That's where you make change. But, you know, I don't see a lot of young people flocking to our Tea Parties here. It seems to be a lot of the same people who would otherwise be Republicans, but, you know, here's another group they can go to. So, you know, I don't know how totally effective they are. I don't like to use the word Tea Party. I like to use liberty, the liberty wing. And I think that is exactly what we stand for. The Republican Party, and I'll just talk about the Republicans, are not exceptionally interested in small government.
Right.
They really aren't, because they're too vested in what big government does. And I think we see this when you hear Romney talking about, and Ryan too, you know, oh, we're going to save Medicare, we're going to save Social Security. Well, you know, the bold thing to say is we're going to transition away from those flawed Ponzi scheme programs, because they're not right, they're not constitutional in the sense of what federal government should do, and they don't work very well, and they're also deceitful. You know, I mean, people pay into Social Security and they think, oh, you know, that money's somewhere, then I can get that back. Of course you can't.
Right.
That money was instantly spent by the federal government. You will never see it again. You will borrow from your grandkids. Well, if I'm going to borrow from my grandkids when I'm old, why don't you just let me do that? I'll do that directly, you know, and get the government middleman out of it if I'm going to borrow from my grandkids.
So over the summer, I was reading Condoleezza's book, No Higher Honor, or as I like to call it, Cover My Rear. And I'm not exaggerating. Whenever I was reading this book, I couldn't help but think of what your perspective was, which I believe is the correct perspective and the accurate historical record of what was going on leading up to the Iraq War. I was just, out of curiosity, wondering if you happened to read any excerpts. You almost don't even need to read her book because, you know, whether it's Condoleezza Rice's book, Dick Cheney's book, Don Rumsfeld's book, you know, they could parse certain things about the relationships, but whenever it came to the war in Iraq, the story was pretty much concrete and the same. I was just wondering if you had any comments about the compare and contrast between your version and the other version.
Well, I haven't seen particularly what she's written, but I'll tell you, I think you nailed it when you said when it comes to the Iraq War, their stories are identical. Well, there's a reason for that, and that's what cops know when they interview people. If they've got people that are all telling the same lie, those lies don't vary, right? When they're telling the truth, they remember different things, and the stories tend to change. When they're telling a lie, they tell you the exact same thing every time. And that's kind of how it's a clue to that it is a story that they've all agreed on, and this is what they're sticking with. So that's part of it. But, I'll just tell you, common sense is what, if people have common sense and some sense of what makes, what's the simplest explanation, kind of like the Occam's razor thing. If you look at Iraq back in 2003, or we can go further back to the first Gulf War. But what changed in 91 that caused him not to be our friend? Well, we were shaking his hand 4 months before we invaded.
Right.
So, and if you look further back, you say, why were we shaking his hand? Well, he was our guy. He was our guy. He was, one of the folks the CIA had helped elevate into the Ba'ath Party of Iraq. And we liked it that he was in charge of that country. And we aided his side in the Iraq-Iran war for years. And then when that war ended, there was a reevaluation, and, okay, now he's the new enemy. So, the whole, you can say, well, we did the war for this or that. Well, no, really we didn't. We just decided we didn't like this guy, and we have some overarching objectives, and this is one of the ways we can get those achieved. And one of the objectives, of course, we had some objectives in the first Persian Gulf War. But let's just go back to the more recent time, in 2002, 2003. Saddam Hussein was costing us a lot of money in that we were enforcing a no-fly zone and economic embargo. That wasn't working because the Europeans were trading with them and so were others. So we needed some way to get off that embargo enforcement waste of time and money, which was not really working. So, how do you move forward from that status quo? Well, you make a war. You either quit the embargo, which looks like a loss, or you progress forward into a war. He had gone off the gold, or rather not the gold, he had gone off the dollar, the petrodollar. He wasn't selling any of his oil to us.
Yeah.
If we were buying Iraqi oil, we were getting it through third-party or transactions. And he was selling his oil for foodstuff completely to the Europeans and to the Russians. And with the Europeans, he was selling on the euro. So he's doing things which we need to switch. And of course, the very first executive order that George Bush signed relating to Iraq in June, when he declared victory or whatever, or mission accomplished, was of course to put Iraqi oil sales back on the dollar.
Yeah.
To price those oil sales in dollars. So there's some financial reasons. We certainly were getting kicked out of Saudi Arabia. There's no doubt about it. Operations in Saudi Arabia were very difficult for us to do. They were putting restrictions on where we could fly, what we could do, when we could do it. So we needed a place to operate. So this whole lily pad of forward operating bases, we needed that. Where would be the best place to impact and manipulate and support ongoing operations in the Middle East? Well, what better place than Iraq? You've got a naval base to the south. You've got a number of air bases, which, of course, we immediately poured literally, billions of dollars into upgrading those into U.S. quality military bases. I mean, Air Force bases and naval bases and all the stuff that we need to further advance our aims. Well, so these are the reasons that we go in there. And of course the Israelis, part of their overall regional strategy fits into that. So these are the reasons that we did this. What are the things we tell the American people? Well, American people aren't going to buy this because, it doesn't make, it's hard to sell. It's not easy. They need fear and they need loathing. Okay? Well, the fear and loathing come with the story that was told. And I don't know if Condoleezza defends the WMD story, but
of course.
Certainly stories, yes. So the stories needed to be told to bring the Americans on, to bring the citizens and the politicians that maybe were on the fence, to kind of sell it. And that's what we did in the summer of 2002, and this is why I luckily I was close to retirement, but I accelerated my retirement. I could not be in a place that was just doing things, like what we were doing, which was called lying. And it's not new, but to me it was new. I guess I was naive before, and I didn't realize that we lied to people. And when I saw it for myself, of course, it was frustrating. But the lying had to be done to sell the war. But the reasons for the war were totally different. They're the same reasons that a lot of countries go to war. And, of course, some countries, go to war. We may do it again in our lifetimes. We may do it again several times in our lifetimes. But there are always reasons that the politicians want, and they are driven by their version of strategic or economic necessity or political necessity. If you want to get elected, why do they always worry about an October surprise in an election year? Why do they worry about that? Because these wars, these activities have political ramifications, which can help politicians. But none of it is for the defense of this country, even though we'll tell people that. WMDs, defense of... Well, no, there weren't any WMDs. And if he had them, how did we know? Because first off, the UN had inspected. Second off, what did he have? Well, we knew what he had. We sold it to him. We gave it to him.
Right.
So a lot of this stuff, it's just common sense tells you, it's just kind of strange. And it's very frustrating. Now, I do think most people today realize that we were lied into that particular war. And I hope a lot of them are looking at our history in the 20th century and maybe even before then, and realizing that most every war this country has been in, because we haven't had war on our own property, in our own continent per se, but almost every war that we've engaged in the past 100 years, we've been lied into. And I hope they draw that conclusion, because as we get poorer relative to our debt owed to other places and other debt we can't pay back, so as we get economically poorer, we should become aware of these demands on the budget, and war is a big one, and being constantly prepared for global war that we've always been lied into in the past for the most part. It's good for Americans to think about this so we can make good decisions, at least be aware of it. And I think a lot of people are leaning in this direction. They're saying, should we have guns or butter? And they're thinking, well, maybe we just have a little more liberty. We'll buy the butter and we'll worry about the guns ourselves. So I don't know. I don't know if that's where it's going or not, but I certainly don't need to read Condi's book.
I could save you $20 or $30 right now by telling you the synopsis. Every other chapter was 9/11 wasn't our fault. I was George Bush's favorite. Colin Powell and I were BFFs, right? And Dick Cheney and I didn't get along, and he's the reason why I'm not talking to Rumsfeld. So that's the synopsis of her book.
Oh my goodness, that's interesting. So she's got a lot of personal stuff in there, yeah.
Right.
Well, it's enough about me. Let's talk more about me, right? That's
right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the military. You and I are both vets, and I want to talk about a sensitive subject, and that's military suicides. As a former Iraq vet, I was heartbroken when I looked at the cover of Time magazine. I believe it was July 23rd, and they were reporting that one U.S. soldier commits suicide per day. Do you believe that the federal government is doing enough to combat military suicides?
Well, I'm not sure what they're doing to combat it at all, first off. I'd like to. I didn't read the Time article. I don't know if there's, they probably have programs. I think what our federal government, at the federal level, and what the military is doing is much like Condoleezza Rice was doing in her book. I think they're trying to cover their butts.
Right.
I think they're trying to figure out ways that they don't have to count suicides of guys that have been, out of the military 60 or more days or 90 or more days. I think they're looking at statistical ways to make it look better, and they're trying to clamp down maybe to get people to report people to the mental health facility so they can be jacked up on drugs, which is what is the standard procedure, is to give our vets and our soldiers lots and lots of pharmaceutical counseling. And I don't think this is good at all. I think there's reason. I think there are probably fundamental reasons which relate to our foreign policy, which relate to our military policy, which is leading to this suicide. And some of it has to do with the nature of our volunteer force, the nature of our recruitment. The other part has to do with, repeated tours. Well, all these things, the military is not willing to deal with the fundamental problems. It's just a Band-Aid. Now, that's my opinion. I haven't studied it extensively, so I can't give you other than I know we're doing a lot of pharmaceutical counseling, and I know we're doing a lot of covering our butts with the numbers. But other than that, I can't say what else they're doing. But it seems to me that the fundamental reasons that we have high suicide rates are stress and alienation and lack of a really focus on what's good and right and fair and just.
Right.
Because people who aren't stressed out, people who believe they're fighting for something that is just, that is fair, that is something they can be proud of, okay, most of those people don't see suicide as an option. Who sees suicide as an option? People that aren't proud of what they're doing, people that are stressed beyond the point of logical thinking, okay, people that feel alienated from other people. Why? Because maybe the other people that they're working with, are doing things they don't agree with, and they feel helpless. So, if you think about that, we have to change our foreign policy if you want to get less suicide.
I agree.
Sure. And they're not willing. And what I'm saying is, and you may be saying this too, I don't think the government, the military at all, is willing to do what's really required to reduce that suicide rate. It's going to remain a symptom of what's wrong with with our foreign policy and what's wrong with the way we're running our operations.
I agree. All right. Now, when it comes to supporting the troops, everybody supports the troops. Yeah. Well, at least that's what people say. Do you believe that people?
Afraid not to.
Yeah, right. Well, my absolutely. Do you feel that the people really know how to support the troops? And the reason why I ask is because really the only thing that I see whenever people are supporting the troops is they will cheer at parades, mail the troops Country Time lemonade and Bill O'Reilly books.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what your thoughts are whenever I ask you that question.
Well, the whole issue of supporting the troops means it's used by government to basically present citizens with a false dilemma. You don't like our foreign policy. Well, that means you're not supporting the troops. Really supporting the troops, and this happened, early on in the days of the Afghanistan invasion and the Iraq invasion. Remember when people were raising money to send body armor over and raising money to send steel panels over so they could reinforce their Humvees and stuff? I mean, that's supporting the troops, and that shouldn't have been necessary. That should have never, ever been necessary. So there's that kind of way of doing it. But for the most part, we support the troops so we don't have to be one. We already know, and I don't know how it is with your personal history, but there's kind of a family tradition in some families, military families, that serve in the military. And there's a certain tradition in communities where, and a lot of them are poor communities, where going into the military is the thing you do.
Right.
And there's a whole bunch of people in this country that don't ever serve, don't have to. And part of this, we don't have a draft, but even when we had a draft, the rich people didn't have to serve. They didn't want to. You go to college. Well, right there, self-selection out of the military. But we have this thing where a certain sector, a very narrow sector of our society, kind of like Spartans, they go do the military stuff. And everybody else sits back and says things like, we support the troops. Well, they don't really support the troops. In fact, they should just be honest with themselves and say, well, I don't want to fight. And to really support the troops, I don't think they should fight either. At least a war that's not constitutionally declared, at least a war that has nothing to do with security of this country. So, it's just propaganda. And I hate to say it, I support the troops by making sure my kids don't turn into one. I support the troops by trying, but I'm very ineffective at this. I wish I could be more effective, but if we can bring the troops home, that's a way to support the troops. And even when we bring them home, and you've probably seen this yourself and had buddies from these guys doing a couple tours, they come back you know, what do they talk about to their family and stuff?
Right.
A lot of them, it's so what they've done is something they can't even really communicate well. It's very remote. There's a sense of alienation. So, you know, bring them home. Change your foreign policy. You know, we've got a constitution. Why not follow it? You know,
right.
If the Congress wants to declare war, let them do it.
Right.
Let's see how it works when the whole country is behind a war. You know, and then talk about supporting the troops. But if you're going to say support the troops and then let them go participate in these things that are not constitutionally declared wars, which are really boutique wars, political actions, not even wars at all, you know, support the troops, what? That makes no sense. So it is used by government to kind of get people to shut up about it, to shut up about the foreign policy, to shut up about the fact that the Congress pays for these wars but never has the backbone or the spine to actually have a vote to declare war or not. You know, and remember back, this is only like a summer ago, 18 months ago, whatever, when Obama went and bombed Libya. Remember that? All the Republicans were so mad.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "Oh, you did this thing and you didn't ask us for permission." And then he asked for money. And they said, "Okay, yeah, you can have money. We'll pay for that."
That's right.
Yeah. So they don't have any spine, and you know, they should be supporting the troops before they ask us to. And they should do that by holding the president, who has been, whether it's Obama or Bush or any of them, holding their feet to the fire, to the law of the land. And, you know, I mean, if we'd had a constitution, if the Iraq War in 2003, the invasion there, had been held up to a vote, even with all the propaganda that was happening in Washington, if we had said we're going to have a declaration of war against Iraq, I think many of the holes in the intelligence would have made it up to the level of mainstream media, possibly, maybe not, but possibly. And they would have said, you know what, a full-blown declaration of war is not warranted, and neither is the deployment of any troops into Iraq, because your information is no good. But instead, the president gets to do whatever he wants. And this has been the habit for decades. You know, we haven't had a constitutional declaration of war since World War II. And there's debate there that if that wasn't, you know, kind of, you know, politically designed. But certainly nothing since then has, you know, 58,000 people of ours and millions of Vietnamese, no declaration of war. No, we'll just do that because the president wants to. So,
gotcha.
It's very upsetting to me. But yeah, I don't buy. I think when somebody says support the troops, it's just code for shut up and do what you're told, and that's not right. That's not American.
Gotcha. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski, I want to very much thank you for being a guest on this program today. Maybe in a few months, when we're going to war with Iran, I could have you on, and you could have some comments on that.
Sure enough, yeah, absolutely. I love talking to you, and best of luck with your new show here, and you know, call me anytime.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.